My name is Jody Goodkin, and I will be the presenter for our topic of human trafficking. I've been a physical therapist for over 27 years and also involved in health science education for over 20 years. I look forward to discussing this topic with you today. We are going to define what is human trafficking, as well as discuss how you will be able to identify individuals who are potential victims, how to report suspected cases, as well as make you aware of resources that are available to victims and survivors. Our goals and objectives will include defining both sex and labor trafficking, exploring red flags to help you identify individuals who are potential victims, as well as go over reporting guidelines and resources available to victims and survivors. The information that I present today is compiled from various federal government as well as state of Florida resources and the National Human Trafficking Resource Center. On the last few pages of your course notes packet, there are several links provided that will be helpful to you in the clinical setting as you explore this information further. As with any information that you learn in a continuing education course, when you go back to provide this in the clinical setting, you're going to do so in accordance with federal, state, and professional regulations. And specific to this topic, you're also going to follow safety guidelines as well as any policies and procedures related to human trafficking for your specific facility. This is a 1-hour recorded video home study course. You'll notice that several of the slides have an icon on them that says "Consider this." That's to let you know that those particular slides are going to be helpful when you go to complete the post-test. The way the course will run is you will watch this video for the next hour. At several points in the presentation, a slide will come up with a post-test question. That's to allow you to consider your answer to that question as you're learning the content. Once you finish watching this hour-long video, you will go back to our website, cheapceus.com, in order to complete the post-test with a score of 70% or higher. You can resubmit it multiple times if needed to achieve that score. Once you achieve the 70%, you will submit your online payment, print your certificate, and your continuing education hours are completed. When we define human trafficking, this is when individuals are forced, lied to, manipulated into physical servitude and sexual exploitation. It's a situation where their basic human rights and dignities are leveraged for the financial gain of other individuals. This is modern-day slavery. It's been described as the business of stealing freedom for profit and has become a multi-billion-dollar criminal industry. You might find it interesting to note that traffickers do seek medical services for the individuals that they are trafficking. It unfortunately happens when they have sustained severe acute injuries from abuse or workplace injuries. They have developed infections or chronic disease, and they do take them to seek medical services. There was a study in 2014, and the individuals that they identified in that particular study related to human trafficking, 87.8% of them had accessed medical services at some point when they were being trafficked. The most common places where these individuals are taken to receive care are emergency rooms, urgent care centers, Planned Parenthood. Often it'll be facilities also where it's a cash type of basis and insurance is not being utilized. Florida has recognized that as healthcare providers, we are on the front lines of this, encountering these victims. And it's important that we become aware in how to identify them, because those of them that are accessing medical services, the majority are going unidentified. So the state of Florida has recognized that we have an opportunity as healthcare providers to break the cycle for these individuals and get them in touch with resources if we know how to identify them and appropriately take action. And that's the big push that the Florida Department of Health is currently focusing on, for healthcare providers to move from just awareness of human trafficking to taking action to help eradicate this problem. Polaris is a global researcher and promoter of anti-trafficking efforts. In their research, what they have noted are 25 different types of human trafficking. When we think of this topic, many of us may first come to mind with sex trafficking, which is a percentage of the cases. We also want to consider that labor trafficking makes up a significant number of the cases. So the individuals maybe at the facility where you're practicing, or if you're going into a home care or a different location to practice, potentially the commercial cleaning crews, the landscapers in those locations are victims of trafficking. In the home care setting, domestic work, individuals who are forced to be nannies and provide services in the home, potentially the caregiver for that child if you're in pediatrics, or that elderly individual if you're working with the geriatric population, they may be a victim of domestic servitude. Also, in the healthcare setting, we want to consider that some healthcare settings you may be legitimately practicing. The individual practicing down the hall from you or in the next treatment room, they may be a victim of human trafficking and be involved in a situation where they're being sexually exploited. So we really need to be aware in our different settings to help eradicate the human trafficking. It's been noted when they look at the data on this that individuals who are victims of sexual exploitation, that many of them were at one point in time in the foster care system, and many of them were runaways. It makes them more at risk to be exploited. So there are actually procedures put in place by the juvenile justice system to try and identify these individuals sooner. We also want to distinguish between smuggling and human trafficking. Smuggling is when someone is illegally taken across a border. Human trafficking is illegally exploiting a person. Oftentimes this occurs together. Where we're focusing today is on human trafficking, that exploitation of the individual. We want to realize that the perpetrators as well as the victims span all ethnic, gender, socioeconomic classes, that this is a problem that is surrounding us that we can help play a role in eradicating. Looking specifically at sex trafficking, this is when an individual is forced or coerced, or through fraudulent means they're enticed with some other lifestyle or benefit to perform sexual acts for the financial gain of someone else. It occurs in casinos, hotels, home settings, as well as public places such as streets and truck stops. They recognize that oftentimes the internet serves as a mechanism to set up these meetings to allow for that exploitation to occur. Specifically discussing commercial sexual exploitation of children, anytime a commercial sex act is performed by a minor, it is a crime. It doesn't matter if the individual is maybe bragging or happy about the benefits that the lifestyle gives them, of the travel, of the personal possessions. If their perception is they're being treated well, anytime that there is a commercial sex act performed by a minor, it is considered sexual exploitation. There does not need to be any evidence of force, fraud, or coercion. And this is important to recognize, that these cases must be reported, because these individuals are being exploited. They're minors. They cannot make that that decision to participate. And again, they're often in these situations, as adults are, where they are deprived of their basic rights and dignities, where they might be required to meet quotas just to receive food and shelter. So it's not always money in the different types of human trafficking that's exchanged. It can also be where the individual is forced to perform different work or sexual activities in order just to have food and shelter and their basic needs met. Labor trafficking is occurring in many different settings. It's not just in the agricultural industry. It's also occurring in different factory type settings, in restaurant kitchens, also in domestic settings where the individual is confined to a home and forced to work in that environment and not allowed to leave. They've recognized it in construction, in hotels. It may be what appears to be a legitimate business that some of the individuals who are working there are victims of labor trafficking. So it might be the facility that you're in, you don't know the hiring practices of all the subcontractors and the cleaning crews and the other individuals. So we need to be aware and have our eyes open when we talk about the red flags. As we discuss this topic today, I want you to consider your clients as well as the individuals who may be bringing the client in, a caregiver, and then also just be aware of your facility and your setting if there's anything that may trigger a red flag for you. There are many misconceptions that are out there related to human trafficking. A common one is that it's not in my community, that it's not around us. The data says otherwise. That's not the case. There are definitely reports in all 50 states throughout the United States. It's in suburbs, it's in small cities as well as towns. It is unfortunately everywhere. And these are silent victims that are forced into these situations through no fault of their own. They may be U.S. citizens, they may be foreign nationals. It is unfortunate the number of individuals who are victims of human trafficking. When we consider gender, the data shows that a significant number are men that are victims of sex as well as labor trafficking, in addition to females. And when we look at the percentage globally of sexual exploitation and labor trafficking, that the larger percentage is in labor trafficking, that it is more cases related to that labor. When we consider individuals who potentially are accessing healthcare services, this is again why there is the push for us as healthcare providers to become more educated. Over 50% of the victims that accessed healthcare services went unidentified. So there's a great opportunity here for us to help identify these individuals and remove them from that situation. You might consider that individuals are unable to self-identify, that the individual who is the victim of human trafficking, they're often reluctant to come forward for a variety of reasons, and sometimes it's more than one reason, that these traffickers, they know how to leverage the vulnerabilities of individuals in order to create this dependency and situation where they feel they have no other way out except to stay in the physical environment that they're trapped in and performing the actions that the trafficker is requiring of them. This might be exerted through physical control, where there are threats or actual physical violence towards the victim or their families. There may be the provision of drugs to create dependency. Often individuals are isolated. They are not allowed to leave where they work or where they're being forced to live, so they don't have opportunities to interact with others and gain assistance. Those are just the physical restraints that are placed under them. If you're in an environment going into a home setting or even a workplace, and you look at the physical environment or what the individual is describing has covered windows, extra bars, that they are being physically locked into an area. Those are red flags of potential human trafficking. Psychological control over the victims is often utilized to keep them under the trafficker's control, that they don't have any other way to provide for themselves or their family. They're threatened with, well, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? A large component of this is related to the fear of arrest or deportation, that the traffickers often keep hold of the passports and the identifying documents for the individual, or the individual may not have a legal status in the United States, and that's hold over their head as a way to control those individuals. Debt bondage is where the individuals that are being trafficked are in the circumstance where they maybe have been brought to the United States and they have no other means to provide for themselves, and they were charged a fee to be brought over here. And now the trafficker is continually raising that fee, charging them for rent, charging them for, even toiletries. And the price or the debt that they have, they're being told, well, you can pay that off through this sexual exploitation or labor trafficking, except the wage they're given versus the debt, they never match up and they never pay it off. So they're constantly stuck in this situation, which is a crime. As we look at the individuals, the terminology that we utilize, we need to take care with. The term victim is what's utilized by the criminal justice system. It's a legal term to identify an individual who has suffered harm as the result of criminal conduct of someone else. And then these individuals are also survivors. That's the terminology that's often utilized in this services field in order to recognize the strength and the power that this individual has in order to move to that journey of healing and to get their lives back together. And thinking of this helps drive the services that are being developed for individuals to get them out of the human trafficking situation, as well as to put their lives back together. The approach that's utilized in order to assist the individual, and you need to consider these individuals have been deprived of everything, even the most basic human needs. They've been convinced that they need that trafficker. And this is a crime. So there needs to be a balance. So what's utilized by all the different agencies as they're developing different services and protocols and resources is considering that there is a need to bring these traffickers to justice because they have committed a significant crime, but that needs to be balanced with minimizing additional trauma to the individual who's been trafficked and support their dignity and right and what they need. So it's a balance in terms of encouraging the individual to provide information to law enforcement that's necessary to help identify and bring the traffickers to justice, but not re-traumatize them, because the real important thing is to get them out of that situation and get them back into a typical life that they are entitled to. This victim-centered approach is recognizing the fact that the individuals become trapped by circumstance and what different aspects are necessary to improve it. different protocols that have been developed are taking into consideration what I just mentioned about the victims, that they are not the criminal, their trafficker is, and that they have specific needs. So there's a framework that has been established by the National Human Trafficking Resource Center for individuals in healthcare to help us think through the process of how to identify and assist these victims. So it's important to recognize that when the individual is entering the healthcare setting, the primary concern is to first identify their immediate medical needs and to address those medical needs that they have. In the course of providing that care, what we're going to do is be aware of any potential red flags that may let us know this individual is in a trafficking situation. We're going to develop an appropriate relationship with the individual, so maybe they will share with us if they are in a trafficking situation. We're always going to be aware of assessing potential danger, and that is to remain safe for ourselves as a healthcare provider, the other patients and staff members in the setting that we're in, as well as the victim. And we'll review the specific procedures on how to report cases of human trafficking. And then in terms of screening to confirm that and access to resources, we'll discuss the agencies that are going to assist with that portion of the process. Please remember that as a healthcare provider, it is not our role to be investigators, that we just have an opportunity to identify these individuals, and we'll go over how you can make that connection to the appropriate agencies to help improve their circumstance. When we look at identifying victims, the Department of Health and Human Services, I think their campaign really sums it up. And what they focus on, their campaign, is to look beneath the surface. And that's to really remind everyone that this is happening around us, and we need to be putting the pieces of the puzzle together to say, oh, that might be a potential case. And again, it's not our job to confirm it, but if something, as we go through what these red flags are, gives you alarm that you think something may be going on, you're going to want to report that tip. But you're going to balance that with maintaining safety and remembering you're not law enforcement. You are not responsible for investigating it. We can just help play a role in identifying it. Now, depending on the setting that you work in, the Florida Department of Health actually includes screening questions in their intake forms for any individual who is seen at a Department of Health, and that's to try to help identify the victims. But if you're not in that setting, you need to know the specific red flags that you need to look for. Realize that all these red flags that we're going to discuss, all of them do not have to be present in order for it to potentially be a case of human trafficking. And again, you need to consider them in context, because someone just having one red flag may not mean maybe they have a tattoo that to you seems, not the kind of flower you would have. But if that's the only red flag, it may not mean anything. So let's take a look at what these different red flags are. First, related to specific living conditions for the individual. This may come up. You're not necessarily going to ask them all of the questions on these slides. They're just posed that way for you as a clinician to ponder them in the course of your care with the individual. That when we look at living conditions that may come up in conversation, if we're actually in that setting, we want to notice, are there locks and chains? Are the windows covered up? Are there excessive bars that are keeping someone inside a particular area? A lot of heightened security measures, maybe even a lot of cameras that just don't seem to make sense, that the individual is being excessively monitored. If an individual is working and living in the same physical space, that may indicate that they're a victim of labor trafficking, that they're not free to leave, or sexual exploitation where they're bound to that specific area. The image in the picture here is actually from a sweatshop in California. It was an apartment complex where the traffickers had taken the lower basement level and turned it into sewing rooms, and then upstairs in the apartments, they had many individuals crammed in that they were forced to live there, and then they were never allowed to leave. There was barbed wire, there were dogs, they had if they needed toothpaste or personal hygiene items, they had to buy them from the trafficker at an exorbitant price. Plus, they were being charged rent, and they were just stuck in that debt bondage where they were never able to pay off that debt, and they physically couldn't leave the situation to even get help. So this is often going on for individuals that we need to look at the setting they're in. If someone's coming in with injuries that are related to hypo or hyperthermia that don't really fit with the environment that you're in, as well as other types of infections from living in poor hygiene type of areas, we want to be aware that maybe that's a potential red flag. Looking at working conditions, if the individual expresses this to you, or maybe even in the setting that you're in, you look at what's going on around you, or be aware what's happening in that next treatment room down the hall. Do you see minors that are there all day and adults coming in and out that might be a cause of concern? If the individual is in a situation where they have little to no wage, that their money that they're making is very low salary, and they're not paid directly. Their salary is directly given to someone else and then kind of doled out to them. If the individual's injuries that they're presenting with are from a lack of safety equipment, oftentimes when individuals are being labor trafficked, that the focus is not on safety, so that different equipment is not available. Maybe they're coming in with different respiratory type of infections from different chemical exposures. Particularly individuals who are involved in seasonal work are at a greater risk for labor trafficking because they're constantly being moved around. Now, when we consider work conditions, we need to put every piece of information together. And just because someone makes minimum wage or they have a job that's boring or they don't like, that doesn't mean it is labor trafficking. It's these other pieces coming together where they are being exploited specifically and deprived rights, dignities, and what they're legally entitled to for wages for the financial gain of someone else. Then it might be trafficking. As we look at mental health and behavior, traffickers also utilize psychological means in order to control their victims and these individuals from being in these continuously stressful and abusive situations are going to present in different ways. There's no one way the individuals are going to present. Some of them may be very fearful and anxious. Maybe they're uneasy with around us, that they're rushing, wanting to leave before their medical services are completely rendered, or there's an individual who's forcing that along, that family member who's always with them, kind of rushing things along before treatment is completely finished. And be aware that that individual who's with them, who is trafficking them, may be the same gender or a different gender. It does not just fall one way as well as the other. On the other side, the individual, they may be much more submissive. Maybe if their trafficker is present, they're just giving one word, very short type of answers. They're not being very specific with things. As we look at potential physical red flags, this is an area where, as healthcare providers, we're examining our patients, and we're always should be looking holistically at every area of their body, not just staying focused if it's their leg that we're treating. We should be aware of the whole person. And when we look at potential signs that the individual may be a victim of trafficking, we're looking at where someone is presenting with poor hygiene and malnourishment, particularly in the face area. Even if you're treating the rest of the body, always be aware of your patient's face because it gives us a lot of different information on conditions. But with this population, we want to look at the teeth. If the individual is showing tooth decay that doesn't fit with their age, if they're physically missing random teeth, that is not typical. It may be from potential physical abuse. Someone who has bald patches in their head, that unfortunately could be from someone using the hair to restrain them or move them around, and it's created bald patches. Also be aware with children. When children fall, the most common areas, or if they have what's considered an accidental type of injury, where they're going to have their bumps and bruises will be along the shins of their legs. And then often this T-zone of the face is where if they fall and hit something. It does not make sense for a child to have random bruising on their ear or other areas of their body or around their lips. That is not common. It may be a potential indicator of physical abuse for that individual. As we're examining the skin of someone on this bottom left first image here, if you notice patterned scars, bruises, old wounds, or new lacerations, things that are patterned are often from objects, and that doesn't occur accidentally. So we're going to look for those sharp edges, those patterns, any wounds. Oftentimes, when traffickers are abusing their victims, they're doing it in ways that will not compromise that worker's ability for them or not be physically visible. So a lot of times it'll be down on the lower back area that we'd be looking for this. If you see different wounds, bruises, if you're looking at radiologic findings that are at different stages of healing that don't fit with mechanism of injury, that would be a red flag for this potential abuse for an individual. When we look at injuries from specific types of restraint, I don't think it's something that many of us have encountered in healthcare, so you might not even know what to look for. So that's why I'm taking a little bit of time now to go over some of these, just so that you've seen it and heard it once. So if this individual does present to you, you'll be better able to identify it. On this second image here, if you look where just next to these blue lines, and then we have a bruising up on this individual's ear. If you see two lacerations or bruises with that central sparing and then another bruising up top, that might be from a buckle where you have that open area in the middle and then the clasp creating another wound. Individuals who are restrained may present with ligature marks, like in this next image. Those are often linear, sometimes symmetrical wrists, neck, ankles. They say that from rope restraint, those marks are a combination of bruising as well as abrasion, and sometimes there's a patterning to it. That's not something that happens, on accident. Individuals oftentimes, if they're presenting with road rash and they did not sustain an injury where that is consistent, when we look at this next image at road rash, we want to be aware of the location of the body. Do they also have missing patches on their head? Is it possible that they are being drugged or pulled against their resistance? Cigarettes are sometimes utilized to cause harm to an individual to try and control them. When we look at cigarette burns, those are going to be small, about 1 centimeter in diameter with very defined edges. And you're going to commonly see these on the hands, the neck, exposed areas of the body, and you might see multiple that are in different phases of healing. Looking at tattoos, I've actually spoken with individuals who are in law enforcement, and they have relayed stories to me or I should say cases, where individuals have presented with tattoos that are actually barcodes. And oftentimes it's found on the nape of the neck. Sometimes individuals have a type of tattoo that is going to say something, property of or belongs to identify them. Any unusual tattoos, branding, combined with other indicators might let you know that someone is a victim of trafficking. As we consider the individual's lack of control, we're going to look at some other indicators in our communication with them and their physical circumstances that are surrounding them? Is there always someone with them? Are they frequently being monitored? When you ask them about their mechanism of injury or even about their history, does the story not make sense, or it changes as each healthcare professional asks them about it? Or is it too similar that it's a scripted type of story? Also, individuals who are not allowed to speak for themselves. And consider this in the context: if the individual has no apparent physical limitation or cognitive impairment limiting their ability to communicate, there is no reason for you to think that there's a language barrier, but still they have a translator or they're not allowed to speak for themselves. That just doesn't make sense. As well as those very scripted stories that don't fit with their clinical presentation. Individuals who are lacking personal possessions, maybe they have no cell phone, they have attire that just doesn't fit with the physical environment. It's winter and they're in summer clothes, or they're a child and they're in excessively provocative clothing. We need to be aware of that. And again, an individual who does not have possession of their own identification documents, driver's license, passports, any type of identification, or even their own money, that would be a potential red flag. And all of these we're going to look at together, because each one individually you could make a reason why it's not of concern. But as we're putting it all together, these red flags might lead you to believe that the individual is potentially a victim of human trafficking. Some other red flags that you are going to consider as you're interacting with the individual: and workers who are seasonally in an area are at a greater susceptibility to this. If the individual really doesn't know where they are, if they have no sense of time, seasons, physical location, it might be that they're being moved around so much and maintained in the same work and home living environment that they do have no sense of the world and what's going on, that it might be a potential concern. As we consider these different red flags, when we're interacting with any patient, we are going to develop that rapport with them. When you have a sense that an individual may be in one of these circumstances where they're being trafficked, there are a couple additional aspects that you want to pay attention to so that you develop an appropriate relationship that maybe they will open up to you, so you can gain enough information to help them get out of this circumstance, if that's the case. When you're with the patient, you always want to be aware of safety. And if you are the healthcare professional that is going to be specifically engaging with them about their circumstance, maybe you are specifically trained in anti-trafficking, you are a mental health or social services, you're going to look at more of a private screening. And one specific aspect for all healthcare providers to remember is that individuals who are being trafficked, they are being deprived of everything. And one way that you can develop a rapport is to meet their physical needs, to offer them a drink, offer them a snack, let them pick where they want to sit. Anytime you can try to give them control back is going to let them feel comfortable. The way that we interact with them, we do need to physically engage in healthcare in order to assess and provide care, but as with any patient, you're going to read them and you're going to be sensitive to that. You're not going to do excessive physical contact. You're going to ask their permission. It's best to be down at their level physically as well as at eye level, and maintaining eye contact, moving very gingerly, letting them know what you're going to do, and engage them in order to develop that specific rapport. You're not going to make any promises. If you do have a sense that they are being trafficked, don't promise anything. You're just going to look at opportunities to refer them and connect them with resources and law enforcement if necessary to get them out of the situation. We're going to be very respectful, empathetic, non-judgmental, because they may be feeling uncomfortable about what brought them there and their circumstances. So we don't want to contribute to any potential negative feelings that they may have. We want to develop trust, rapport, comfort, and really make that individual feel safe. We are not investigators. We are not going to be probing to get as many details as possible. What our role is, if we see the red flags, the way they're interacting with us, we have a sense that they might be a victim of trafficking, we're going to look at focusing on reporting that to the right individual who will then investigate. That safety assessment is so important. What you need to do is assess the potential danger of the situation if you feel someone is being trafficked. If you were physically out, maybe in a workplace or in someone's home where they are a victim of domestic servitude, you might physically need to remove yourself from the situation in order to maintain your safety so that you're able to go report that potential case. If it's in the clinical environment or the hospital, you need to consider the other patients and staff as well as this patient. Anytime you have a situation where you feel there is immediate danger to yourself or others, you're going to follow your facility protocols for safety and call 911 if that's what is necessary. But first, you need to assess what is going on. You're not going to assume every situation needs to immediately have you interact and take charge. You have to stop, pause, think about safety for the individual as well as the others around you. It's not your job to immediately remove that individual from the situation. You might need to call for assistance. How do we make these decisions? Because it's not necessarily what we're trained in as healthcare providers. If we assess the situation and we get that sense that there is danger for someone, we're going to seek assistance from 911 if it's an acute emergency. Otherwise, if we're just not sure, the best thing to do is contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And we'll look at that number on the next couple of slides. But their role for the National Human Trafficking Hotline is to assist the clinician in assessing that level of danger, see if law enforcement needs to be called, see what the next course of action is. So when in doubt, you're going to contact them to try and help you determine the best way to proceed, because the individuals at the National Human Trafficking Hotline are specifically trained in anti-trafficking procedures. When you do suspect that an individual is a victim of human trafficking, whether it's an adult anywhere in the United States or a child outside of Florida, your action would be to call the National Human Trafficking Hotline so that they can help you assess the situation. You do not need the victim's consent in order to do this. You can just report a tip. It is anonymous in order to report. Let's say you think someone's a potential victim of sex or labor trafficking, and you're concerned, well, what if I'm wrong? It's important for you to realize you can just report a tip. If you are wrong, there's no negative consequence for you. But if you're right, you saved a life and maybe multiple lives because of your awareness. So when in doubt, contact them. The anti-trafficking advocates at the hotline, they're there to help you work through the thought process. That's what they're experts in. We're coming to them with what we see and have observed is going on, and they'll help us make that decision on how to proceed. They're available 24 hours a day, over 200 different languages. So it can be us as a healthcare provider contacting them, or it could be the individual themselves who is the potential victim contacting them. I will caution you, in all of the information that's out there, it does say that if the victim wants to reach out themselves, but not at this moment, don't force this phone number on them. Don't give them a card, put it on a piece of paper and say, take this, because if the trafficker finds that on them, it may make the situation worse. So you need to, in that situation, maybe consider you making the phone call to report that tip. In order to reach the hotline, they say the easy way to remember the phone number is 888 and then 888 on the other side of it, and inside you have 3737. So it's 888 3737 888. The other way you can remember it is be free if you're texting. So the phone number is be free, and then all the individual has to text is help, and then they will be put in touch with the hotline. And this is why the hotline exists. It is not an immigration agency. It is not a specific government agency. It is not law enforcement. Their intent is to help decide what to do. Is this individual a potential victim? Once the report of the tip is made, the human trafficking screening assessment needs to be conducted. This is typically done by an individual who is specifically trained through law enforcement, social services, mental health providers, or the human trafficking hotline to conduct a specific screening to see if the individual is a potential victim. It's not necessarily our place as a healthcare provider to ask these questions, and this is where it's important to know your facility policy also. If they have someone appointed, that would be the individual to take that next step of getting more information and conducting the specific screening. As the individual who is conducting the screening works with the potential victim, they're going to use what's called a trauma-informed approach. And it's important to recognize that these individuals have been in these abusive, emotionally entrapping situations for potentially a long time. So it has a physical consequence on them also, that these individuals may physically and emotionally react to different situations in an unexpected way. So these individuals who are advocates who are completing the assessments recognize that the potential victims see themselves as helpless. The world they live in is very dangerous. They need to be cautious. There has not been anyone that they can trust. So the approach that's taken bears this in mind. And again, the real focus is on the individual's needs, giving them back some control, some power, so that they can interact and hopefully share the information that's necessary so that they can get assistance to get out of their situation, and law enforcement can take the next steps to hold the traffickers accountable in the legal system. There are multiple resources that individuals would be connected with through the human trafficking hotline. They encompass emergency services for their immediate needs, as well as transitional services, and then long-term. So it looks at many different aspects, everything from their physical needs with health care. Maybe they've been deprived of basic dental care and nutrition, food and shelter. Where are they going to go? How are they going to live? Do they have children with them? Mental health, substance abuse, and addiction services are important, as well as legal services. Just think about transportation, education, and skill training to have another job and way to provide for themselves. There are many different government resources as well as private organizations providing resources to help individuals improve their circumstances. And all of these services that are specifically designed for victims and survivors of human trafficking are utilizing this survivor-informed approach, where they realize that on their different boards and organizations, they need to have input from individuals who have survived so that they know what services are necessary to provide. So they're hoping to continue to improve this moving forward. The National Human Trafficking Hotline provides many different types of resources. They might just include, after that initial phone call, reporting that tip. Maybe it's a follow-up call with the potential victim, or they need to take it a step further to emergency assistance and law enforcement. That is their area of expertise. Our place is just to identify, connect them with the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and then they will determine the best and safest way in order to proceed. One aspect of concern for many individuals who do not have legal status in the United States is how are they going to feel safe and secure during this time. So immigration relief is a component that the government has put in place. They have two different types of immigration relief for individuals who are victims of human trafficking. Continued presence is the first one. This is a form of short-term immigration status. It's a temporary legal status that's provided to foreign nationals whose presence is necessary while law enforcement is completing the investigation. This is typically utilized for individuals to keep them in the United States while the case is being investigated by law enforcement, and they do not need to be cooperating to receive the continued presence. The T and U visa, this is going to be for individuals specifically who are assisting with the investigation. They're cooperating with law enforcement, and they actually become a temporary United States resident for up to 4 years during the process of the investigation. There's a possibility that this could be converted into a green card, and that it might even be extended to their families. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services offers many other resources to individuals who qualify. There are so many different organizations, both government and community agencies, providing all different levels of care to individuals to try and get their life back on track. The Trafficking Victim Assistance Program specifically is from a government agency that looks at case management, and it's similar to exploring resources available from the federal government for refugee assistance. So it's going to include many similar services that we've previously discussed, but it also is going to explore immigration services. Remember, these individuals need everything from healthcare to housing to employment. So there's so many different agencies that can assist, and I have all the different links to these programs available at the end of the course notes packet, because you might be working with individuals as your patients or clients who are survivors, and you can connect them with additional resources. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security Blue campaign is where you can go if you want additional information or even additional training. It's focus is on public engagement for awareness, educational resources to help allow us to better identify and service individuals who are victims of human trafficking. As healthcare providers, our role in anti-trafficking efforts is to be vigilant in recognizing those red flags, to potentially identify individuals who are victims, connect them with that anti-human trafficking resources through reporting of them to the National Human Trafficking Hotline so that we can help improve their circumstance and eradicate human trafficking. I thank you for taking your time to attend this course.